Brilliant. What a way to start. All right, let's get into this. So, CIF 1984 to 1994 cultural moments. CIF. This is of course CIF24. This is what is this? Civic issues. How do you spell issues? I don't know. Nobody knows. It's a mystery. Civic issues and contributions. Fall 24, Part 1. So that's how all that titling works. Very simple. Very straightforward. That way you can navigate around videos much more simple. So to make things clear, at the very start of this one, 1, 2, 3, 4, there's probably going to be 4 parts to each one. I'm going to try and make sure that's all it is. Make it nice and simple. Make everything work out. Yeah, we'll see how it goes, though. No promises, as ever. Okay, let's get into this. Civic issues and contributions, Fall 24, Part 1, cultural moments. This is actually a little more fun than it sounds. It's a little more fine than I would like. So, let me pull up my fancy note. This has multiple different sections in it. Our first section is going to be our cultural snapshot. And as part of our cultural snapshot, we're going to look at multiple different aspects of the culture. We're going to look at the music. We're going to look at some films and some TV. We're going to look at, what's left? Tech. And of course, there's always a couple moments in each decade that really matter. Alrighty, so let's start out with 80s music. 80s music. So 80s music is dominated by a whole bunch of different factors, but one of the most major ones is the rise of all sorts of different single artists. And that's, of course, characterized by all sorts of different things, but the clearest is Michael Jackson, with multiple massive hit albums. Huge fun, check them out. The start of this decade, however, August 1st, 1981. This is an important date for the culture because it is the launch of MTV. MTV will serve as like the premier location for music videos during this era. Eventually, of course, that will turn into the internet. And then but at this point, if you want to see music videos, this is where you end up going. Michael Jackson's music videos, which we now found on YouTube. You should check them out. Thriller, 10 out of 10. It's like an 11-minute video, but it's still great. Thriller's the best-selling album. The best-selling album of all time, which is kind of a remarkable feat. Bad is the first album to produce 5 U.S. Billboard top 10. I lied. Number 1 hits. Holy smokes. To my knowledge, this is repeated a little later on by Katy Perry, which is kind of a funny afternote. But at the time, of course, it was a remarkable accomplishment. And nowadays, music has sort of fractured to the point where this sort of thing might not even be possible in the future. Yeah, it's kind of crazy. 1982, there's some music, of course. This is Toto's Africa. Released then. There's some music, of course, that has become more prevalent now over time than it probably was during the 80s. So this is a track that we're very familiar with today. Which, you know, it wasn't that around at the time, but is perhaps more popular now than it was then. Whereas, of course, a lot of 80s music, Depeche Mode, for example, I think, has kind of faded into the distance. Another one that has some amount of staying power is Madonna. And Madonna is important to note here as not only as a cultural icon, but as an important cultural icon in the development of how women are being seen in this period. So this is Madonna's album called Madonna, 1983. The hit track Check it out. It's a lot of fun. It's called Everybody. This is like this is like everybody dance, doo-ba-doo-ba-doo. Can't remember how it goes. It's like the most generic sort of pop dance track. I like it when I hear it. It's a huge amount of fun, but it's not super distinctive or anything. However, it is super 80s and super danceable, so check it out. Formed in 1980, and yet down here on the list, Depeche Mode, however that's pronounced. They make very 80s music, very sort of synthy. They're using still sort of traditional instruments, but they've got a lot of like new production techniques and some new sounds and synthetic sounding stuff. And their vocals often sound like they're underwater, or some section of their instrumentation will sound like it's underwater, but they're still playing a lot of acoustic or electric guitar, that sort of thing. So, and regular sort of drum sounds, but also sometimes they're playing with loops as well. So, you got a big mix of 80s stuff. The shout out there, I think, is probably the track Personal Jesus, which is still getting remixed to this day. Oh, yeah. So that's a quick snapshot of some of the pop of the 80s. A quick shout out to Madonna, who we're going to come back to, because really how women are being perceived at this time is important. I mean, we should linger there for a moment in this very quick snapshot of all of this different stuff. Yoink! All right, I'm going to yoink this away for a second. You ready? Oh, beautiful. What did it end? Red and Depeche Mode. So continuing, of course, rock stars of the 70s. They continue into the 80s, obviously, and they keep on rocking. Van Halen, ooh, sick album. Check this one out. Fair Warning. This is always harder than it should be. There we go. Wrong fair. I panicked. Fair Warning. This is a 1981 album. It's a lot of fun. I grew up listening to it, so I'm very fond of it. Best track is Unchained. Yeah, sick guitar riff. Eddie Van Halen, of course, passed recently. He was one of the great guitar players, so if you're into that sort of thing, check him out. The Police. 1983. The Police, this is their last album. Synchronicity. I don't know as much about the Police, but again, totally iconic 70s band. Fizzle out in the 80s. Bruce Springsteen keeps on chugging, but his biggest album by far is in 1984. Born in the USA. Huge fun. Bruce Springsteen's biggest album. And this one I know from Greatest Hits collection my uncle gave me, so I got some familiarity with that. What else we got going on here? We're moving into funk now. Parliament and Funkadelic, they're starting to dry up. Parliament and Funkadelic. These really are, so George Clinton is the driving force behind them, and these really are the driving guys behind funk overall. But unfortunately, their run comes to an end in the 80s, though their influence they're hugely influential, and they play a massive role in the development of early rap and hip-hop. Parliament Funkadelic dry up and hit legal issues. Their last big hit, great track, Atomic Dog. Prince. Prince is a massive pop star. He's funky, he's pop, but he's also a huge pop hit. Prince releases in 1982. This is when Prince releases 1999 album, great album. I grew up listening to the hit track off of, or one of the hit tracks off of it, the title track. Prince again, definitive for this sort of period and sound. Hugely influential, and also just himself a peculiar and interesting character that interacted with Muhammad Ali and pretty much all of the great people of the day. If you look up Prince stories on YouTube, you get this endless list of famous people telling you about their weird interactions of the time they played ping pong with Prince or something. All right. Boom, Cyndi Lauper, 1984. And we actually come back to this later on. Is the MTV Movie Awards. And Cyndi Lauper takes Best Music Video. Yeah. And this is significant because, of course, the best video, totally brain fell apart there for a moment. This is Girls Just Wanna Have Fun. It's huge fun, but it's also kind of controversial at the time because of its pro-sex positive message, essentially. And unfortunately, so the sexual revolution, which really gets fired off by the invention of contraception, reaches kind of a horrifying halt in the mid to late 80s as a result of AIDS, right? The AIDS crisis kicks in, and all of a sudden people are much less comfortable about having promiscuous sex because, death is a terrifying thing. Yeah, shockingly enough. So, Cyndi Lauper. One last classic. Oh, a date on this, whatever. Definitely from the 80s. Never Gonna Give You Up by Rick Astley. So this track again became huge afterwards. Was also pretty popular at the time, and it's pretty great. Like you're allowed to unironically enjoy Rick Astley music. It's not fantastic music, but he's got a great voice and he's doing really fun things with the track. So if you haven't heard that one, then I guess you just haven't been on the internet. I don't know what to tell you. And if you don't know what I'm referring to, it's not actually a part of 80s and 90s culture, really. It's a part of the later culture. This is one of the many ways in which 80s music has sort of resurfaced later on, which is important for a number of reasons, including its influence on more modern forms of music. So, moving on to genre music. (1986) Master of Puppets. This is by Metallica. This is their breakout big hit album. Formed in 1981. Later, of course, they become known as part of this Big Four. Metal's Big Four. Megadeth, Anthrax, and Slayer. Megadeth, Anthrax, and Slayer. Perfect. Right now, still quite an underground genre, but starting to pop off and break out. Rap, Paid in Full. Eric B. and Rakim. Great track. Spelled wrong. Sorry. Rakim jumped in there. Eric B. and Rakim. Yeah, got it. What do I say about this track? Listen to this music. It gives you that, or it gives you all of the things that you're familiar with in modern rap, the sort of braggadocio, the confidence, the stories of rags to riches, all of this other good stuff. But in a very different sound. and using rhyme schemes that are quite and flows that are quite unfamiliar to today's ears. I find a lot of this old rap quite challenging listening, but this track is genius. It takes a while to get started, but once you get into it, huge fun. Give it a listen. What else we got going on here? Gangster rap, of course, starts to take off in this period. That's the music that the rap music that I first started getting into way back in the day. Way back. So we're talking about things like, I remember when my cousin showed me this, 1988, and not in 1988. The Great Adventures of Slick Rick. This is a #1 charting album. The track I first listened to on it is Children's Story, which is huge fun, and I still know most of the words too, but unfortunately we don't have time for me to regale you with it right now, and also it's not exactly appropriate, shall we say. This music, again, is more many of the modern characteristics of rap, but here he's telling stories. He's telling stories, and there's clearly a more fictionalized aspect to the story, but it seems to be based very much in reality, and that's kind of cool. Both of those elements are still a really big important part of rap music that they've changed in a number of ways over time to appeal to different audiences. Also in 1988, NWA, Straight Outta Compton. Crazy album, great stuff. Compton, if you don't know, is in the West Coast. Eazy-E, Ice Cube. Gotta leave some space here. Dr. Dre, very significant, and then perhaps less significant. Sorry guys, DJ Yella, MC Ren, and Arabian Prince. All right. Eazy-E, so Ice Cube, Dr. Dre, all famous in their own right. Eazy-E, I got a shout out right now, unfortunately, for his sad end, age 30, dies due to AIDS. Right, a reminder that AIDS is around in this period and is killing people, and it's starting to become different communities are more aware of it. The gay community is, of course, aware of it first in all sorts of ways, but eventually awareness spreads to the rest of the society, and there is eventually action from the top to deal with AIDS, which is mostly successful these days. If you're caught at the right stage, you can take a medication that will essentially prevent you from developing AIDS while having to live with HIV for the rest of your life. Anyway, continuing back on. Eazy-E, age 30, dies to AIDS. It's out there doing damage. Terribly sad stuff. Ice Cube, of course, very famous. His 1990 album, America KKK's Most Wanted, sort of reflects the anger present in the gangster rap form of this music, and in much of rap as well, to be honest. And this is part of the reason why it's important to understand the culture of these different times and to understand what's going on geopolitically at the time, and try and put together these different pieces to understand what these complaints actually are and how they're justified and what they're based on. Dr. Dre releases an album, The Chronic, 1992. In 1992, sorry. It's very confusing for those of you who know Dr. Dre. I guess, wait. Or it's not. That's confusing. Is it confusing? I don't even know. So this album, Dr. Dre's The Chronic. Dr. Dre's crazy. He's like the sort of rapper that doesn't quite exist anymore. He was just like overtly not writing his own lyrics. He rapped other people's stuff, and people were okay with it because he was honest about it, and he was a part of some ridiculous products, and everybody wanted him to produce their stuff because he was amazing. Yeah, it helps to be awesome. But also, normalize just rapping other people's stuff. It's not that bad. Not a big deal. 1991, Sons of the P. The P here is Parliament. It might even be Parliament Funkadelic. It's definitely George Clinton's band, and they're grabbing that sound, man. Fantastic artists involved here. Digital Underground. It's basically a rap collective. Piano Man, Major Member. Oh man, you got like 4 different aliases, of which the most famous was Humpty Hump. Oh yeah. Digital Underground. This is G-Funk. Right. Sorry, G-Funk. P-Funk. P-Funk. P-album. P-Funk rap. Oh, you always get one of those. It includes in its members, the Digital Underground, a little-known fellow who's about to pop off called Tupac Shakur. And they'll go and record a hit together a little later on when he's really dropped off. One of his big early albums was, of course, Tupacalypse Now. I really enjoy Tupac. He's a crazy rapper. His lyricism is just out of this chain, and his ability to talk about things that are still extraordinarily relevant to pretty much everybody is really something. That's the wrong page. Sorry, that should be a 2. Entered the Wu-Tang. At the time, not respected, but now appreciated as one of the best albums by a very talented collective of people, including called the Wu-Tang Clan. RZA, Jizza, Method Man, Raekwon, Ghostface Killer, Ghostface, Inspector Deck, Master Killer, and of course, everybody's favorite, oh, Dirty Bastard. Now deceased, of course. Rest in peace. 1993. Snoop Dogg. Snoop Dogg Drops Doggy Style. Oh, sick album. Just so funky. And Snoop Dogg has the most sort of relaxed and bouncy sort of flow. It just works so well. This is, of course, West Coast hip hop. And Snoop Dogg has basically he's a huge collaborator with Dr. Dre. This album comes out of the East Coast in New York, I believe, and New York itself. I think some of these guys are from New York or something. I forget. Sorry, guys. The New York itself is definitely really important in hip hop, with, of course, a shout out names being Jay-Z, and then at least one other dude whose name should be on the tip of my tongue. Nas. Sorry, Nas. Took a minute. All right. Moving on from the glory of music. Ooh. Moving on from the glory of music to 80s films and TV. First off, this is the end of sort of like everybody watching all the same TV together, and one of the most distinctive ways of measuring that is the record setting. 125 million, this period, the 80s that is. A mash. How do I write this? Like this? Perfect. MASH. I never watched MASH. I'm sorry, but the finale was now, because I wasn't around in the 80s, I guess. It's called Goodbye, Farewell, and Amen. Good on Amen. Sorry. Goodbye, farewell, and Amen. Which is important for a number of reasons, partly because the whole Amen thing. This is very popular. Amen. This will shift over time. The level to which culture was Christianized in the 80s is very different from the way it is Christianized today. The summer blockbuster continues. It's only just been invented. It's essentially invented in 1975 with Jaws. And then, of course, the success is repeated in 1977 with Star Wars. Huge films. You haven't seen these, man. Oh, what are you doing? Go watch these movies. Jaws is, of course, Spielberg. And Star Wars, of course, George Lucas. Raiders of the Lost Ark releases in our period in 1981, or just outside of it. This is also a Spielberg, in case you are unaware. Escape from New York. Directed by John Carpenter. A crazy movie, atmospheric, very 80s. Check it out. Back to the Future, still iconic to this day. 1985, RoboCop. Here we have this science fiction theme showing up again and again. No points for guessing what movie inspired that, right? RoboCop. Where's the date on RoboCop? 1987. The Goonies. Oh, 10 out of 10. Check this one out. This is another Spielberg. Is it? Oh, man. Well, if it's not Spielberg, it's incredibly Spielberg-esque. The Goonies. Huge fun. Oh, no, sorry. It's not Spielberg. I even wrote it down. It's directed by some guy who I don't know called Richard Donner. Forgive me. 1985. Arnold Schwarzenegger. So I am an Arnie fan. What can I say? I even have one of his watches. I'm not sure. I'm not wearing the Arnie. Oh, ridiculous. Failure. Commando. What's the watch I have? 1985. Commando's a really silly action movie. It's huge fun. He goes around, he's breaking people's necks. You know, everybody who gets blown up by a grenade, like, does a backflip off of a trampoline or something. It's huge fun. It's a ridiculous 80s action movie. There's no, like, horrifying gore or anything. It's just ridiculous, over-the-top action. Okay, there may be a tiny bit of horrifying gore. But, you know, it's mostly just ridiculous, over-the-top action. Find out the hard way. Predator. 1987. Fortunately, this is not that type of predator. It's a weird alien creature that goes around and murders things. Also huge fun. Arnold Schwarzenegger, of course, trying not to get murdered by the terrifying alien. John Hughes, this turns into a series, which lines up with another great film, Alien, and its successors, which are also of mixed quality. John Hughes. He's one of the absolute sort of like star directors of this period. If you want to think of like an 80s director, John Hughes is the one that seemed to come up over and over again as I was looking into it. Ferris Bueller's Day Off is the John Hughes movie I'm really fond of. Ferris Bueller's Day Off, that is... I don't have a date on that, I'm sorry, but it's in the 80s. Matthew Broderick and Jennifer Grey. Both looking very 80s, especially Jennifer with a perm. Hughes works with something called the Backpack. The Brat Pack. Whose most famous film a collection of actors, essentially, that did several films with John Hughes, and also sometimes without or something. The most famous film is The Breakfast Club. In 1985. Yeah. Meanwhile, of course, Tom Cruise breaks out for basically doing a striptease in Risky Business. But nice music. This is a much imitated scene. Look it up, you can find it online. Alrighty. Show that one more time. Doo-doo-doo-doo. Almost there. We're almost there. Tom Cruise. Top Gun comes out in 1986. No space for that. Top Gun comes out in 1986, and that cements him as like a huge hit, right? And Tom Cruise just sort of takes off from there and never really looks back, as far as I'm aware. Top Gun. At TV shows. We didn't have time for masses of stuff on TV anymore, so I threw in the A-Team, Knight Rider, Cheers, and Alf. Alf is pretty vile, at least I've never enjoyed it. It's about like a puppet. Knight Rider and A-Team are both sort of action kind of deals, and I guess Knight Rider involves puppet action too, if you think about it. And then Cheers is more like a family sitcom. There's a bunch of other TV shows from the 80s and stuff, but at this point we've done pretty good coverage of other things. We've got to skimp somewhere, unfortunately. One of the things you can also turn on the TV and see in the 80s at almost any time was aerobics, of which the most famous was Jane Fonda. Jane Fonda, this is like dancing to music. It's huge fun. Jane Fonda's Workout. This you can watch on YouTube for free. It is like the most popular. It claims to be, and has the stats to back it up. The most popular workout video ever. I imagine it's even more popular than it claims to be for reasons like the record-setting TV shows that we're seeing in this period. Yeah. Okay. Moving on. Which I'm not going to talk about. Haha, suckers. Or I already touched on. 80s tech. This is huge fun. I'm also losing my voice. I got to get into this. 80s tech. Arcade games. So the era of arcade games is essentially ending. Pac-Man hit in 1980, which is a huge deal. And but how can it be ending? Pac-Man's a big arcade game, right? Yeah, it is, but it's also big on like every other platform known to man, as is Missile Command, 1980. And of course, your favorite game and mine, Donkey Kong, 1981. Donkey Kong will, of course, become famous for its character, who will be known as Mario. These games are all ported to like a million different things. This is like a characteristic of this era. We got a ton of different new platforms coming out, and then people just constantly putting new software on them. August 12th, at IBM computers start running an OS called MS-DOS. Kind of crazy. MS-DOS will later be called something. It will later develop into something that we will call Windows. 1982 in August, again, the Commodore 64. Commodore 64 is just like it's released, and it just like comes to dominate this computer market, this cheap computer market. Dominates the cheap computer market. Nah, you don't need to know that. October 1st, 1982. CDs, compact discs, are released. Compact discs are released. If you're not familiar with CDs, well, they were the dominant sort of form of music storage during my childhood. I was born in 1994, or at the very end of this period. At that point, tapes are still around, but CDs are really, they're the thing they're in, you know, so that's like 12 years after they've been released, right? So that makes a lot of sense. Are released 1983. So this is an important concept, the killer app. Killer apps. So killer apps are essentially pieces of software that are so good that they sell the platform that they're released on, and vice versa, right? You buy the platform because you want the app. So here, at this point, this isn't the first killer app. There have been several before, but the killer app is released on the IBM PC, which is one of the reasons why it's going to be important. You're running, of course, on the MS-DOS software. On the MS-DOS operating system, that's the word I'm looking for, and it's called Lotus 123. It's just a spreadsheeting app, but spreadsheeting is really important. And in fact, a previous spreadsheeting killer app called VisiCalc had really brought the Apple II market dominance in its time as well. So spreadsheeting is essential for all sorts of like basic market and business applications. So it sells a computer really well. This means for those of you paying attention, that the Apple II was a computer bought by businesses. Excuse me one second. All right, back into the action. From 1983 to 1986, we have the video game crash. During this period, essentially, all these different cheap computers, including things like the Commodore 64, they storm and they overwhelm the market. Companies are like hoping that this boom of computing is going to like last forever, and it takes quite a while to set up all these lines. So you end up having this massive like inertia of supply building up, and then when basically the people who want computers already have them and don't feel a particular need for a new, cheaper computer that isn't that much better, that they'd have to learn a new interface for, the market crashes. This crash doesn't last very long and things recover, but it explains the release dates of a number of different games. It's not a huge deal, but it's just kind of cool how sometimes crashes in the market can be the product of people innovating too quickly. They're like, oh, we got to get the stuff out to market really, really fast. But unfortunately, market innovation ends when demand dries up. All right. 1983. In Japan, a sick project, the Nintendo NES, one of the flagship gaming systems from the 80s, it releases in Japan, but for obvious reasons, it's not until after 85 that it releases in North America and the rest of the world. Sort of like a rolling set of dates. In 1984, something cool is happening outside the video game sphere, but still in the tech world. In 1984, the Motorola Dynac. Motorola Dynac. This is basically the first cell phone is released. There's car phones before this, but no real cell phones. It is a whopping, in case you think you're paying a lot for your phones now, it is a whopping $3,995 in their money. Nowadays, in 2023 dollar, it is $11,700. So, yeah. Don't complain about the cost of your phone, I guess. This thing is a brick. It cost this much money because it was the first generation. It was hooking into some ridiculously expensive infrastructure at that point people had not figured out how to pay for. But unfortunately, I can't tell that story right now. In 1984, it's a famous book, 1984, not written in 1984, but in 1984, Apple, the company, releases a video referencing that book. 1984 won't be like 1984. It's a sick video. It becomes itself sort of a cultural icon. It's released during the Super Bowl. And the purpose of it is to launch a brand new product. And that product is the Apple Macintosh. The Apple Macintosh will become sort of like a flagship computer for them, and they'll call all their computers Macintoshes, basically for a long time. I'm not sure when that ended, or if it even is officially over. Cool. 1985. Tetris. So Tetris is published in the USSR. Later, in 1988, it's published in the USA. The USSA as well. In the USA as well. In 1985, there's a killer app on the Macintosh. And that killer app is Aldus PageMaker. Now, Aldus doesn't mean much to you, but they will later call themselves Adobe, which I'm sure most of you have heard of. This is what is called desktop publishing software, but it looks like a modern a word processor is what we call it. But word processors had been developed before this time. Anyway, moving on. 1987, you get another sick game drop. Start of a huge series. The Final Fantasy game is released on the NES. In 1988, the Sega Genesis is released, and you can see the video game times are back in full swing. The Sega Genesis will have a number of flagship games in its time. Sonic, Mortal Kombat, which will also end up on this will certainly end up on like every other platform as well. I'm not sure about Sonic. Disney's Aladdin. This is a video game. This is a video game based on a movie, which has a terrible reputation now, but this game, amongst others, actually had a really good reputation at the time. And NBA Jam, they've been doing NBA games forever. They've been doing sports games for absolutely ages. 1989, SimCity is released. SimCity, these are more like simulation games, and this was, to my knowledge, the first really big smash hit sim game. Meanwhile, the shooter genre is going to start getting its feet off the ground and establishing some of its basic norms in 1993, when Doom is released, a game which has now been ported onto pretty much everything on the face of the earth. Alright, so thank goodness that's all of our tech stuff done. We're almost there. We've got one last section to complete, and that is our defining moments of the period from 1984 to 1994. As always, unfortunately, we're not going to be able to hit absolutely everything, but we've got pretty decent coverage so far, and we're going to try and continue that into our last section. Alright, let's hit it. So, somehow I've scaled down a little too far. Defining moments. 1984 to 1994. In 1980, the Satanic Panic. The Satanic Panic is triggered by a book called Michelle Remembers. Basically, what is the Satanic Panic? This idea continues, and it's a fairly common conspiracy that is picked up by a whole number of different people who should probably know better, and it's essentially that there's these like satanic death cults or sex cults or something trying to corrupt your children, often through imagery and popular media. So yeah, satanic death cults after your kids. It leads to like the banning of a number of like symbols in games and stuff through this period. It's not a huge deal, but it's definitely reflected in all sorts of different pieces of media, and it's something that other sorts of media really react negatively to and strike out against. So that's in 1980. On December 8th of 1980, something sad happens. John Lennon is shot. This is a huge cultural event in this period. It's one of the reasons we have these defining moments. It's hard to know how to fit this into history, but it's quite easy to know where to fit this into culture. It's a really big deal. Shot by a guy called Mark David Chapman. Mark David Chapman. I heard a number of different explanations at this point. What I have seen is that he wanted to model his life on Catcher in the Rye, which is a book that if you've read, you will understand how shooting John Lennon could play a role. In 1981, somebody else is shot as well. March 30th, Reagan is shot. Ronald Reagan, President Ronald Reagan is shot by John Hinckley Jr. In order to impress Jodie Foster. It didn't work. Jodie Foster. Both of these are obviously kind of like crazy incidents carried out by total lunatics and really sad. Hopefully over time we will get better and better at providing all the people in society the treatment that they need in order to make sure that things like this do not ever happen. Okay, moving on. In 1981, other things happen as well. April 12th. The first space shuttle is launched. It's a huge success. Everybody loves it. Unfortunately, it has problems, and quite quickly it's apparent that it's very expensive, but we hope that that's going to turn out to be okay in the end. It's called the Columbia. 1981, June 5th. This is the start of the AIDS epidemic. To my knowledge, much of the credit for spreading or bringing the pandemic or epidemic over to the United States goes to someone called Patient Zero, who was a flight attendant active in the homosexual community, and who spread it into the gay community, totally by accident, unbeknownst to them. Spread into the gay community. The gay community itself claims, if you go and read the right stuff, it claims quite actively that it tried to flag that AIDS was a problem very early on, compared to when the government, at least, was making any sort of recognition of it. And part of the reason for that was because it was spreading inside their community, and they were, gay people, LGBTQ people were witnessing the terrible things that were happening to people with AIDS, and trying to find cures and ways to help those people, and in some cases being prevented by the government from importing in the sorts of drugs that would help people who were dying of a horrible sickness. Because, of course, you are allowed to use particular drugs on people who are dying, but first the government has to actually recognize that that sickness is killing the person. There's a number of great resources about this, but there's also a classic movie called Dallas Buyers Club that is pretty sad, but you should check out if you want a snapshot of this period. All right. We'll come back to this, but in 1981, we're going to move on for now. July 29th, at the royal wedding. This is a huge cultural moment. This is the royal wedding of Princess Diana and Prince Charles. It becomes a huge cultural moment for obvious reasons that if you don't know, I won't spoil for you, and we will find out later. But in general, royal weddings are a huge deal, so that's a good starting place. 1984, we already mentioned this one in the music section, but we're going to come back to it. September 14th, first MTV Music Awards. So this is the first MTV Music Awards. We see multiple people perform here, including Madonna and Michael Jackson, who we've already talked about in this period, and Cyndi Lauper wins Best Female Video. As I say that, it occurs to me that I think said she won Best Video before. She won Best Female Video. Best Female Video. Moving on. Where's my camera? 1985. This is kind of cool. I didn't even know this until I was doing the research for this. It's September 2nd. The wreckage of the Titanic was found. It makes a lot of sense, as it was notoriously very, very deep. Titanic is found. And this is, of course, part of the reason why the Titanic movie is made, because James Cameron is a huge diving fan and he wants to go and visit the Titanic. And so he does so, and as he does it, he makes this movie, which becomes a tremendous smash hit. In 1986, unfortunately, the excitement about the space shuttle starts to fade very quickly because in January the 28th, though unfortunately it's not totally true. It should have faded quite quickly, but really this, to my knowledge, turns into sort of a patriotic thing. Support the space shuttle because of this disaster that occurs, which is the Space Shuttle Challenger disaster. Challenger disaster. This is horrible. Everybody dies. It ends excitement about it should have ended excitement about the space shuttle. It certainly raises serious red flags, and the program gets put under substantial, but clearly not enough observation, as unfortunately this sort of disaster does happen again in the future. And both of these disasters, among with the extraordinary expense of the program, are the reason why space shuttles like this are a bad idea, and we use the current method of just sort of having a exploding bottom bit that sends a top bit to space, and then rebuilding the vast majority of it each time, reusing very little. Okay. That's my big chitter-chatter on space things. Moving on to 1987. April. Parents, Music Resource Center. At the PMRC. Tipper Gore is on the board or something. That's Al Gore's wife. Al Gore will play an important role in American politics. Also famous for his activism in climate areas for good and bad reasons. Tipper Gore, wife, famous for this particular activism, which is perhaps less interesting. Trying to protect children from bad music lyrics. Protect kids from bad music lyrics. Most famous, of course, for the parental advisory explicit lyrics notice. that they put on a whole bunch of things to look kind of like that. 1988, an important political moment and also a cultural moment. Especially if you are a fan of American politics. This is H.W. Bush versus Dukakis. And this is the tank video. The tank video is one of a couple instances that really unseats Dukakis. It makes him look embarrassing. And it changes the way that the Democrats in the U.S. do their political coverage. Changes Democrats' political approach. All of a sudden, they're much more aware of protecting the image of their candidate, and you see this very prominently in the Clinton campaign, and it's part of the reason the Clinton campaign goes so well. 1981 to 1989. President. This is the time of President Ronald Wilson Reagan. We'll talk about Reagan more when we come to the political section, but ultimately he's famous for Reaganomics. He's famous Reaganomics. He's famous, unfortunately, for his war on drugs and his treatment through the war on drugs of the black community. And he's also, of course, famous for his response to the AIDS crisis. There's a number of other things that come into play in Reagan, but these are the things that interact most prominently with the culture. And we'll talk a little bit more about the specifics of Reagan's economic policy and or the different things that occurred during his time in office when we're talking about the actual historical and political moments that occurred during this period. So this video is already too long, man. We're gonna get this thing done. All right. Speaking of Reagan, unfortunately, not having a fantastic reputation with much of the black community, 1991, March 3rd. This is Rodney King. Rodney King is beaten severely, I think it's fair to say, by police. What makes this notable, is it's recorded by a guy on an adjacent balcony, George Holliday. And essentially becomes the first viral police brutality video in the USA. As such, it goes on to inspire our next major event, the 1992 LA riots. Behind this, and behind, of course, the actions in the video, is perceived to be not just racial discrimination, but an active policy by police in California and across the United States of harassing black minority communities under the pretense of trying to prevent crime. There are intellectual arguments on both sides about how you should police or what policing should be. But that's not the place for this at this particular moment as we talk about these horrible things that are occurring due to these policies. The most important thing to consider is like what the people who are actually responding to the policies are telling us, and they're telling us that they're bad and that they're abusive and that they are killing black people for no reason, and that's just not okay. And unfortunately, if you go and look into different incidents like this, of which there are many, you learn horrifying thing after horrifying thing. So yeah, this video is available on the internet. I do not suggest you watch it. It's horrifying. This stuff is brutal, but in case you're curious about the modern strain of civic engagement around racial rights in the United States, events like this are integral to understanding that context. All right, last but not least, we're finally there. I had to change my graphic. Last but not least, we got to talk one last time about the AIDS epidemic. With the assumption being I can ever see this note. There we go. So, unfortunately, if we look in our period, if we'd go from, say, 1987 to 1997, I have a graph of what I believe is deaths in the United States, and it looks something like this with a peak around 41,000. That's pretty brutal. This is in 1995. So all the way through our period, we have an increase in deaths due to AIDS in the USA. Over the world, this hump is longer and larger, obviously, but also dies down by, what is it? The deaths have reached their cap around 2005. So that leads to a chart that looks more like this, leveling off around 750,000, and capping at 1.8 million in 2005. So clearly the American numbers and the world deaths due to AIDS are related, but obviously the Americans are a much smaller part of the entire total. The total is, of course, dominated by, to my knowledge, Southern Africa, which is really horrifying and sad. In North America, in this context, however, the AIDS crisis has this tremendous impact on music, on the LGBT community, which has a tremendous impact on art, and it also just on people's relationships and lives, and on the way that people perceive sexual health and sexual illness. It's a really important moment where people are terrified, and some of the famous stand-up of this era is making light of everything, is making light of the AIDS crisis and trying to come to terms with what it's like to be a sexually active person in a world where all of a sudden you could do something with somebody and 3 years later find out that you had a life-threatening illness due to the thing that you did with that person. Kind of terrifying, and really not how the vast majority of our sicknesses even work. So part of the reason why AIDS had such an impact. So that's a very brief overview of a huge amount of stuff. I hope you enjoyed this video. I hope you've learned a huge amount. I hope you've got a list and you go and watch all these great things that we've seen, that we've talked about. And next time we'll talk about political history and stuff. And holy smokes, this is a lot. Have a great day. Thank you very much.